You ever see a moment so wrong, it just grabs your gut and twists? That's what happened outside the Ironwood Regional Clinic on a stormy Tuesday afternoon. And what started as a quiet visit between a father and daughter turned into something that would shake an entire town, maybe even more. Let me take you there. There's an older man sitting in a dull beige waiting room. Nobody pays much attention. His name? Joe Carter. 71 years old, silver hair peeking under a worn-out cap that once saw war zones no one talks about anymore. There's a limp in his left leg from an old injury, not that he ever brings it up. Most folks these days just see the cane, not the man who carried it. Joe's fingers are gripping an old photograph. A young woman in military fatigues, grinning ear to ear, one arm slung around his shoulder like she's never had a care in the world. That's Ellie, his daughter, his pride. She was meeting him at the clinic after work, just a routine checkup. That's all it was supposed to be. But fate has a sick sense of timing. Outside, it's pouring. Rain slaps against the windows like angry fingers, blurring the world into a gray wash. And then it happens. A sharp, blood-curdling scream slices through the hospital air like a blade. Everyone in the waiting room freezes. Joe doesn't ask questions. He just moves. The pain in his knee flares, but he grits through it. Cane in hand, he makes it to the front doors, and what he sees stops his heart cold. Ellie, on the pavement, backpack ripped, face contorted in pain. And standing over her, a cop. Not just any cop. Broad, buzz-cut, mirrored shades even in the rain. Taser still smoking. Like he's just bagged a criminal instead of assaulting someone's daughter. People are watching, phones in hand, but no one's moving. That's when everything narrows for Joe. The noise fades, the chaos disappears. All he sees is Ellie, hurt, humiliated, and the man who did it. He doesn't yell, he doesn't curse, he just walks, each tap of his cane echoing like a warning shot. Something in his posture makes the crowd step back without a word. Not out of fear, out of respect. The kind of presence you don't learn in training. It's earned in silence, in service, in sacrifice. And right there, in the middle of the storm, Joe Carter steps forward. Not as a veteran, not even as a citizen, but as a father who refuses to let injustice stand. The cop turns, dismissive, clearly used to barking orders without pushback. "Back off, old man, this doesn't involve you." But Joe doesn't flinch. "That's my daughter," he says, his voice low but carrying. And something shifts in the air, like gravity's changed. Phones rise a little higher, eyes narrow. People start recording, yes, but more than that, they start witnessing. Because this isn't about a single officer anymore. It's about a system, a pattern, and a man who refuses to back down. The cop, let's call him Officer Dalton, suddenly doesn't look so sure. His authority, once loud and absolute, now looks borrowed, fragile. Joe kneels beside Ellie, sheltering her from the rain with nothing but his own frame. He checks her pulse, whispers something only she can hear. Maybe it's comfort, maybe it's a promise. Whatever it is, she holds his arm like it's the only steady thing left in her world. And then Joe looks up. His eyes don't rage, they don't shake, they cut. And with every ounce of steadiness in his soul, he tells Officer Dalton, "You made a mistake, son, and now you're going to answer for it." No drama, no threats, just the kind of truth that can't be argued with. And in that moment, in the middle of that storm, on a cracked sidewalk in Ironwood, something incredible happens. The crowd, once just onlookers, becomes a wall. They're not just filming anymore. They're standing with him. For Ellie, for every daughter, for every parent who's ever been afraid of what could happen when those who carry a badge forget what it means. Joe doesn't need a weapon. His strength isn't in his arms. It's in his resolve. And everyone sees it, even Dalton. 9 minutes. That's all it took for the balance to shift. The cop's confidence starts to crack. His voice loses that bite. His posture shrinks. Because now, he's not facing a frail old man. He's facing someone who knows what real power looks like, and who knows when it's being abused. Joe stays with Ellie, protects her, anchors her. As the sirens start to roll in from the distance, he's still there, soaked to the bone, kneeling in the rain, but more commanding than any flashing lights or uniform ever could be. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is simply stand. And in that moment, that's exactly what Joe Carter did. The rain didn't let up. It just kept coming, like the sky was mourning something it couldn't fix. But in the middle of it all, Joe Carter was steady, a monument in motion. Ellie was trembling, soaked and stunned, her eyes darting between the faces around her and the father who wouldn't leave her side. And then the tension cracked. Officer Dalton stood just a few feet away, arms crossed, trying to regain whatever authority he thought he had left. But it was slipping, fast. The crowd was no longer silent. Whispers turned to murmurs, murmurs turned to voices, some angry, some shaking with disbelief. Every phone was pointed at him now, recording every second, every twitch, every excuse. Joe's voice cut through the storm again. You need to call your supervisor, now. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a command, the kind that doesn't come from arrogance, but from experience, from decades of leadership, of knowing when to push and when to stand firm. Dalton hesitated, scanning the crowd, hoping for backup that wasn't coming. Eventually, with fingers that suddenly didn't seem so sure, he reached for his radio. Minutes later, more sirens, tires sliding on wet pavement. 2 more cruisers rolled into the lot, lights reflecting off puddles like warning signs. Out stepped Sergeant Tessa Rowe, tall, composed, and known around Ironwood for one thing. She didn't play favorites, and she didn't tolerate nonsense. She scanned the scene with one glance, the injured girl, the defensive officer, the drenched crowd, and the elderly man standing between them all. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice sharp and clear, no fluff, no delay. Joe helped Ellie sit up before he turned to her. "This officer assaulted my daughter. She was standing here, waiting for me. He came at her like she was a threat, no warning, no reason." Ellie, still shaking, managed to speak. I didn't even say anything. I was just texting him to say I was outside." Dalton jumped in, stumbling over words about suspicious behavior, non-compliance, a potential threat, but it was too late. A nurse from the ER stepped forward, young, maybe mid-20s, still in scrubs. She looked scared, but her voice was clear. "I saw the whole thing. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She was just standing there." Others joined in. One by one, testimony spilled out from the crowd. People who had seen it from their cars, from the windows, a janitor near the entrance, a grandmother clutching her grandson. The weight of their words grew heavier with each voice. Sergeant Rowe turned slowly to Dalton, her jaw clenched. "Taser, badge, now." Gasps erupted. The cop froze, just for a second, before obeying. He pulled his badge from his chest, his taser from its holster, and handed them over. Right there in the rain, stripped of the very symbols that once made him feel untouchable. Dalton looked smaller now. Not physically, emotionally. Like someone had just pulled back the curtain on who he really was. Not a protector, not a hero, just a man. And one who made a terrible mistake. As paramedics arrived to check on Ellie, Joe stayed right beside her, never letting go. His voice calm but resolute as he turned to the onlookers. "We're not asking for special treatment. We're asking for what's right. No one should be afraid of the people sworn to protect them." Silence fell again, but this time it wasn't awkward, it was reverent. Some people nodded, others wiped at their eyes. One woman in the back whispered, "Thank you," barely loud enough to hear, but it felt like the whole crowd responded. Inside the hospital, Ellie was examined by doctors, her vitals steady but her mind still spinning. Joe never left her side. He sat in that chair like he belonged to it, like his presence alone could hold her together. Every minute replayed in his mind, every word, every mistake, every second of helplessness. But underneath the pain, something deeper started to grow, a resolve, not just for Ellie, but for every kid like her, for every parent who'd felt powerless, for every moment when a badge was used like a weapon instead of a shield. Outside, the videos were already spreading. Social media lit up. Hashtags, comments, shares, angry voices mixed with grateful ones. Veterans from across the country were chiming in, some outraged, some reflective, all of them united by what they'd witnessed. Joe wasn't looking for attention. He wasn't chasing headlines, but the world had taken notice anyway. A few hours later, the hospital's director, a woman named Colleen Harper, who once served as an army nurse in the Gulf, came to Ellie's room. She didn't bring reporters. She didn't bring excuses, just her presence and a quiet apology. "You reminded us what it means to protect and serve," she told Joe, voice thick with emotion. Joe nodded, tired but clear-eyed. It shouldn't take a crowd or a camera for people to feel safe. That night, in the darkened hospital room, Joe held Ellie's hand. They didn't say much. They didn't need to. Because the worst had passed. But the fight, that was still ahead. This was far from over. By morning, Ironwood wasn't the same. What happened outside that hospital, the rain, the taser, the quiet defiance of a father, had spread like wildfire. Local news picked it up before sunrise, then the regional stations, and by noon, Joe Carter's name was trending across the country. Not as a victim, not as a protester, but as something America didn't know it needed, a reminder. A reminder of dignity, of strength without violence, of what standing up looks like when everything else tries to push you down. Ellie stayed overnight for observation. Joe barely slept, keeping watch like it was a mission. Eyes scanning every visitor, ears tuned to every voice in the hallway. His daughter's safety wasn't just priority, it was everything. When the hospital staff changed shifts, some of them came by. Nurses, janitors, techs, all with soft voices and grateful looks. One man, in his 60s, dropped off coffee without saying a word, just patted Joe on the shoulder and nodded. That was enough. Later that day, a press conference was called. They set up a podium in front of the hospital, the same sidewalk where it all happened. It was still wet from the night before, but the sun had finally broken through the clouds. Light shone on the place where Ellie had fallen, where Joe had knelt, where everything had changed. Joe didn't want the spotlight, but he understood the moment. He stood at the mic, flanked by Ellie, Sergeant Rowe, and a group of local veterans who showed up uninvited but not unwelcome. Behind them were neighbors, reporters, and people who had never met Joe before, but came because something inside them said, "This matters." He didn't speak long. "My daughter was hurt," he began, his voice steady, no notes, no teleprompter. "But she's not the only one. Too many families have gone through moments like this, wondering if their voices will ever be heard. Today, we stand together to say, enough." Simple, clear, unshakable. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Sergeant Rowe took the mic next, announcing that Officer Dalton had been placed on suspension pending a full investigation. The police department would undergo an internal review, and new protocols would be introduced starting immediately for how officers respond to calls on hospital grounds. The hospital director followed, confirming they would implement training for all staff and security with a focus on de-escalation and sensitivity toward veterans and their families. Small steps, but real ones. It wasn't everything. It wasn't justice, not yet. But it was movement. It was the start of something. When the crowd began to disperse, Joe finally let his shoulders relax. The weight of the last 24 hours hadn't gone away, but it had shifted from something crushing to something empowering. Ellie slipped her hand into his. She looked up, eyes wet, and said, "Thank you, Dad. You never stopped fighting for me." Joe smiled, his own eyes stinging. That's what we do. We never stop. In the weeks that followed, the story didn't fade. It grew. Joe and Ellie were invited to speak at schools, town halls, and community centers. They didn't read from scripts. They didn't talk about politics. They just shared what happened and why it mattered. They talked about fear, not just from a taser, but from silence. They talked about courage, not the kind you're born with, but the kind you choose in moments that count. They talked about what it means to protect someone, not because it's your job, but because it's your duty as a human being. And people listened. Veterans across the country reached out. Parents shared their own stories. Young people said they saw their fathers in Joe. Some even said they saw their futures in Ellie. It was more than a story now. It was a spark. Joe didn't ask for any of it. He didn't plan it. But he stepped up when it mattered. And because of that, people began to ask harder questions about power, about protection, about what kind of country we want to live in. And the answer? It wasn't in policies or slogans. It was in one man, in the rain, refusing to let his daughter suffer alone.